Hi Year 10, it's Miss Rasmussen here with your first biology lesson. If you are in triple, it's going to be your only lesson for this week, and if you're doing core, it's the first of 2 lessons. So what we're looking at today is transport. The facts that you need to know, these are also in your fact book, is that diffusion is the movement of particles from an area of high concentration to an area of lower concentration. Active transport is the movement of particles from a low concentration to a high concentration through a partially permeable membrane using energy from respiration. And osmosis is the movement of water from a dilute to a concentrated solution through a partially permeable membrane. And then cells will change mass in osmosis from water entering or leaving the cells. So they're the facts that we'd like you to learn. They're also in your fact book. So we're just going to talk through them and a couple of things for you guys to do as well. So just first of all, imagine a smell. Maybe someone took off their really stinky socks. You're going to start off with high concentration of the smell here. They're going to smell it, but eventually it's going to spread off. It's going to permeate the room and everyone is going to be able to smell these really stinky socks. So thinking just about how that smell is travelling. And the way it's travelling is through something called diffusion. Now, when we're talking about any of these transports, we need to think about concentration. So transport is all about concentration. And when something's diluted, there's not very many particles. So, for example, this is diluted squash. There's lots and lots of water particles, but not very many squash particles. And as we increase the amount of squash particles we've got, the solution becomes more concentrated. So that's diluted and that's concentrated. So when we're talking about the first one, diffusion is the movement of particles from an area of high concentration to an area of lower concentration. So for example, this would be a high concentration. There's lots of these particles together. So we imagine that maybe these are our smelly sock particles, and what's going to happen is that these particles are going to move from where they've got this high concentration to lower concentration. There'll still be some left here, but it all gets spread out. So we have a high concentration and it will move to this lower concentration. So all of the particles will start spreading out. Now, although we draw this as a substatic diagram, they do keep moving around, so the smell of the socks will be all over the place. The diffusion is the movement of particles from an area of high concentration to an area of lower concentration. This is it's a passive process, so it will just happen of its own accord. So what I'd like you to do is pause the video here, draw out your own example and just explain what's happening in diffusion. You could do body spray, you could do smelly socks, you could do squash being made, anything that's showing what happens in diffusion. Right, so welcome back. Hopefully you've got your diagram explaining diffusion. Just something to be aware of specifically for the biology. Diffusion is very important in living things. For example, when oxygen moves from the lungs into the blood, when you breathe in oxygen-rich air. So you have a high concentration of oxygen and it moves into the blood. Glucose, so your sugars that you need for respiration, moving from the blood into cells. And also in plants, for example, carbon dioxide moving into the leaf. So it's things that's happening all of the time in your bodies. Now, the rate of diffusion can change, and there's 3 main things that's going to have an impact. The first one is the temperature. So the hotter the temperature, the faster the diffusion, and that is because when it's hotter, those particles will move faster because they've got more energy. If you've got a larger surface area, there's more spaces where diffusion can happen. So that's why things in the lungs, you've got the alveoli, which increase the surface area. And then finally, the greater the concentration difference, the faster diffusion, and we call that a concentration gradient. So here, if you were to go from this one to this one, it's a large concentration gradient, so diffusion would happen quite quickly. Whereas this one, there is not much of a difference. This is still higher than this one here, but the rate of diffusion would be slower because it's a smaller concentration gradient. So diffusion is all about moving from high concentration to an area of lower concentration. So quick question, oxygen can move in and out of cells by diffusion. Into which cell would the oxygen move the quickest? So make sure you're going which way, so you're looking at which one has got the highest concentration outside compared to the inside. Sorry, and the answer for that one would be A, because this is the higher concentration, this is the lower one. On B, you've got pretty much equal, same as D. C, it would be moving out because it's from high concentration to low concentration. Now, diffusion, we've just said, is moving from this high concentration to low concentration. But what if we needed to move these particles the other way? And this is where something called active transport comes in. So active transport is literally moving things the other way. But in order to do this, we need energy, because this isn't going to be something that's just going to happen. So the definition you need to learn, and this is in your fact books, is that active transport is the movement of particles from a low concentration to a high concentration through a partially permeable membrane using energy from respiration. So it's going from low to high through a membrane using energy. And way to think about it is this. Passive transport, so diffusion is an example of this. You are going down the concentration gradient. It's really easy. You don't need to add in any energy. Active transport, we want to go from this low concentration to a high concentration. And in order to do that, we need to put in the energy. So this is active transport. It needs to actively do something. So what I would like you to do is pause the video, create your own diagram or explanation. You can use these, you can create your own, but I just want your diagram or explanation to explain why active transport needs energy. Take 5-10 minutes on this, make sure it's clear in your mind, and make sure you include this idea of the concentration gradient. So from moving from high concentration to low, or from a low concentration to a high concentration. Okay, so welcome back. You've done your summary on active transport and why it needs energy. Final one I want us to look at is osmosis. So osmosis is specific to water. Osmosis is the movement of water from a dilute solution to a concentrated solution through a partially permeable membrane. So if we just break that down, movement of water, so it's only water that's moving. When we're talking about osmosis, other particles tends to be salt, sugar or solutes will be too large. So it's only the water that moves. It moves from dilute to concentrated, so from where there are lots of water particles to where it's concentrated, where there are not many water particles. So it moves from lots of water particles to not as many. It's the same as diffusion, but this is specific to water. And then your partially permeable membrane. This is a membrane that will only let certain molecules pass through. Classic example is your cell membrane, but it is anything that will only let certain molecules pass through. Now, osmosis can result in changes of mass. Now, just to let you know that in this diagram, no gummy bears were harmed. This is something you guys can have a go at home. Just check with whoever you've got at home that they don't mind you putting your gummy bears or your Haribo into different solutions. If you put them in salt water, sugar water, regular water, you can make them shrink and you can make them grow. So you can actually make monster gummy bears. So what's happening here? If water is entering into the cell or entering into the gummy bear, the mass is going to increase. If the water is leaving the cell, then the mass is going to decrease. So what we want you to learn in your facts is that cells change mass in osmosis from water entering or leaving the cell. So here in the salt water, what you will have is inside, you will have a higher concentration of water than you will have outside. So the water is going to leave into the salt water, and it's going to cause these gummy bears to shrink. If you put them in regular water, you're having the opposite effect. So inside will be the lower water concentration. So the water will move from the solution into the gummy bear and make them swell. So the cells can change in mass in osmosis from water entering or leaving the cell. So just a recap of the facts that we'd like you to learn. There will be a mini test on this at the beginning of the next video, so please take the time, make sure you learn them. Any questions you can pop onto Teams and ask any of the scientists. I believe there's a rota coming out, so you can find a time when you've got a biologist available as well. So the facts that we want you to know is that diffusion is the movement of particles from an area of high concentration to an area of lower concentration. Active transport is the movement of particles from a low concentration to a high concentration through a partially permeable membrane that uses energy from respiration. Osmosis is the movement of water from a dilute to a concentrated solution through a partially permeable membrane. And then finally, cells change mass in osmosis from water entering or leaving the cell. So make sure you're having a look at those facts. They are all in your fact book. Make sure you're learning them. Any problems, log on to Teams and have a chat with any of the science team. And I'll see you guys on the next lesson. Thank you very much.